Seekers of Knowledge, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Cheryl Dixon. I'm currently working on my master's degree through Capella University, focusing on forensic psychology. Eventually, I plan on going after my doctorate to work with children, especially those dealing with a lot of trauma. So today, we're going to embark on a journey. This journey is going to be specifically into the depths of the human psyche, exploring a topic that is both poignant and profound: the intricate connection between childhood trauma and adult criminal behavior, from playgrounds to prison grounds. As Carl Jung said, in every adult there lurks a child, an eternal child, something that is always becoming, is never completed, and calls for unceasing care, attention, and education. Jung's insights highlight the enduring presence of the inner child, not only when we're younger, but as adults. We all have an inner child, right? But this emphasizes the perpetual need for self-awareness, compassion, and personal growth through our life. Unfortunately for some, however, part of that journey crosses paths with traumas that leave indelible marks, influencing not only the physical child, but also the eternal one, necessitating continuous nurturing, understanding, and healing. As such, as we voyage down this long and occasionally rough passage, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it's going to get kind of depressing in here, but you're probably going to be stirred by emotions, or even maybe find yourselves relating to points in this discussion, but that's okay, because even though it's going to get dark, we're going to find the light together. As corny as that sounds, we can make it better. So like I said, we're going to be delving into some uncomfortable territory, challenging assumptions and confronting difficult truths as we discuss high-profile criminals and how their extreme depravity makes them appropriate examples of the extremes to which childhood trauma can lead to adult criminal behavior. Now, I'm going to bring up several high-profile criminals, and the whole purpose of that is to stress how bad it can get when children are exposed to childhood trauma and there is no intervention. It's gross. You know, there's so many criminals out there, but at some point in their lives when they were children, there's been trauma. And I just want to stress how bad it can get when no one helps them. So this isn't about ticking boxes or following a script, even though I am following a script, but let's just ignore that part because I'm not going to memorize a 50-minute speech. Not happening. It is about facing the raw realities of the human experience and understanding the impact they have on our lives and what we, as psychology professionals, can do to hone our skills to protect the young and the innocent. The insights gained today are not merely meant to stimulate your thoughts, but to catalyze action. I want to inspire you to change, to make change for children, including yourselves. Self-care is really important as well. The knowledge that you're going to gain today is going to serve as a cornerstone for building a more comprehensive conceptual framework within the field of psychology. It's going to inspire future research, fuel innovation, and challenging existing paradigms. I know I'm kind of tooting my own horn here, but I'm just trying to motivate you to help, again, make some changes. As we continue to unravel the complexities of childhood trauma and its long-term repercussions, let us not simply absorb information passively, but actively engage with it, interrogate it, and use it as a springboard for growth and advancement. In this exploration, we are confronted with the sobering reality that the experiences of our formative years wield an immense influence over everything we do in adulthood. The innocence of childhood, often envisioned as a time of carefree joy and boundless possibility, can unfortunately be tragically marred by the specter of trauma, a specter that haunts the corridors of our memory and shapes the contours of our own identities. Additionally, we are compelled to direct our attention, again, to the most severe outcomes that emanate from this childhood trauma. As simple as it may seem, you will not believe how much these little tiny events can snowball into something very, very dangerous as children grow up. These extreme manifestations serve as gripping reminders of the urgent need for comprehensive intervention and support systems to address the root causes of childhood trauma while mitigating its devastating effects. By shining a spotlight on the gravest consequences, we are underscoring the need to prioritize the well-being and resilience of our youngest and most vulnerable population. So, get comfortable in your seats, or on the floor, and close your eyes if you will. Imagine you are 12 years old, and it's a warm summer day. Your face is sticky with the aftermath of a cherry popsicle, while the sun is hanging lazily in the sky, painting the world in hues of gold and amber. A gentle breeze carries the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers, mingling with the tantalizing aroma of barbecue drifting from nearby backyard grills. The afternoon sun descends as you and your neighborhood friends gather on your front porch, making sure you're home before the streetlights come on. Flushed with summer heat and excitement, all of you are gearing up for a night of absolute adventure. A sleepover that promises endless possibilities. The air cackles with anticipation as you chatter excitedly, swapping stories and planning the pranks you'll play, wondering how long it's going to take for your mom to discover the saran-wrapped toilet seat, or if you can get up the guts to call that cute boy in your English class. Pillows and sleeping bags are strewn across the living room floor, transformed into a cozy nest for the night ahead. The scent of popcorn wafts through the air, mingling with the tantalizing aroma of pizza delivered straight to your door. As the evening wears on, your bellies are full of delicious pizza and fizzy soda. Everyone laughs as your neighbor Matt as he tries to burp the alphabet, or your cousin Haley as she recounts the disaster of shaving her legs for the first time. Huddling together, you're sharing stories about ghosts and your favorite boy bands. Imaginations running wild in the dimly lit room. Games of truth or dare run amok as your best pal Joe gets dared to slide down the steps in a laundry basket, or if your best friend Lindy has to paint her toenails with her eyes closed. Outside, the stars twinkle in the velvety night sky, a silent witness to the bonds of friendship forged in the flickering light of childhood innocence. As the night draws to a close, all of you drift off to sleep, dreams filled with visions of endless summers and the promise of tomorrow's adventures. For in this moment, surrounded by friends and bathed in the warmth of summer's embrace, you are truly alive. Your hearts are brimming with the joy of youth and the magic of friendship. Take a deep breath now, but keep your eyes closed. At the same time, somewhere else in the world, imagine a stifling summer day. The air is thick with tension, as oppressive as the weights of secrets buried within the walls of a dilapidated suburban home. The sun, as a merciless overseer, casts harsh shadows that seem to stretch endlessly across the warm linoleum floor and stained carpet. The faint creak of a ceiling fan serves as a haunting soundtrack to the grim atmosphere. Inside this house of secrets, a child your same age sits alone at a rickety kitchen table. Hunched over in silence, their young shoulders are burdened with a weight far beyond their years. The air is heavy with the scent of stale cigarette smoke and unwashed clothes, a constant reminder of the turmoil that rages just beyond closed doors. Hungrily, this child laps up a cold can of soup, not knowing when they will eat again. Her laughter is a distant memory, drowned out by the cacophony of raised voices and slamming doors that reverberate through the walls. Each passing moment is fraught with uncertainty. A delicate tightrope dangles between the unpredictable whims of the adults around them, in fear of the white-knuckled menace that connects with their frail form, or the razor-sharp words that cut to the bone, at the slightest inconvenience or eye contact. As the evening descends like a shroud, the child finds solace in the darkness of their room. A lone dirty mattress and threadbare blanket is their only sanctuary in this world of chaos. As they drift off to sleep, their dreams are haunted by that specter of trauma, a relentless presence that lurks in the shadows of their subconscious. Open your eyes. The difference is disturbing indeed. These examples let us know that childhood is a complex tapestry, delicately woven with both light and dark. But it's crucial to recognize that not everyone traverses the sunlit paths of carefree youth. We all have trauma when we're kids, different forms, doesn't matter. It can, the overt signs of trauma typically are not easy to see, especially when we're looking at stuff like kids, that experience the loss of a parent, someone close to them. But there's other forms of trauma, the deeper stuff that's harder to deal with. Just as the Brothers Grimm's tales warn of malevolent shapeshifters lurking in the shadows, childhood trauma manifests in diverse and sinister forms, leaving deep marks on the young mind. This suffering, whether overtly brutal or psychologically manipulative, casts a long shadow over innocence, shaping paths in ways that we cannot see with the naked eye. And it's not just the obvious signs of trauma, not just physical violence that can leave lasting wounds. There are subtle forms, such as emotional abuse, that can have equally serious effects. These experiences, as we know, can shape the way a child perceives themselves, their friends, their family, and just the world around them in general. It influences their behaviors, relationships, and mental health outcomes throughout their entire lives. As Swiss psychologist Alice Miller said, emotional abuse is the silent assassin of a child's spirit. It eats away at their self-esteem and sense of worth until they can't even recognize themselves. And unlike physical abuse, emotional abuse doesn't leave physical scars. That just makes it even harder to address, to understand, and to help. There's actually research provided to us from the National Institute of Mental Health that suggests over time this type of, also known as emotional deprivation, can actually lead to a heightened risk for mood disorders, such as depression and anxiety. We all know this day and age, mental health is huge. It's extraordinarily prominent. And we can kind of research it back to, instances when we were kids, feeling like your parents didn't love you, they didn't care about you. These are all pieces of the puzzle leading to the mental health struggles that we as adults are dealing with now. I'm almost 40 years old and I struggle with my mental health every single day. And I can personally relate to stuff that happened to me emotionally and physically when I was a child. And I know that those are a part of who I am. It sucks. But, I can lean on those experiences and at least help where I can. And there's actually a real example of a, unfortunately, famous serial killer, Ted Bundy. We all know he confessed to murdering over 30 women. Potentially, I think that there's research that shows that there could have been more, but Bundy actually experienced significant emotional trauma during his childhood, including feelings of rejection and abandonment. Not a lot of people know that for whatever reason, Bundy's mother refused to acknowledge him as even her own son. She let Ted believe that his grandparents were his actual parents. Of course, Ted eventually learned the truth. But it is believed that these unresolved emotional issues led to Bundy's complete failure to trust any caregiver. I mean, he put up a good show. His girlfriend, while he was out killing all of those women, he led his girlfriend to believe that everything was just fine and dandy. But in all reality, this only drove his desire to control everyone and everything around him. And we know that this played a significant role in his later violent and just gross criminal behavior. It's funny because we're all familiar with that age-old lament of wishing, we had different parents when we were kids, and it was always over something just goofy, like you couldn't stay up past your bedtime or stay out past curfew. And me personally, when my mom would piss me off, I'd stomp off my bedroom, slam the door, and I'd scream something, I can't be like Annie's mom, or I can't wait to turn 18 and get out of this damn house. However, for Ted Bundy, some of that actually turned out to be true with extraordinarily different consequences. I know most of you here are relatively my age or a little bit younger, but if you do have offspring, or in my case, nieces and nephews, it is probably a good idea to remind them that next time they catch themselves wishing for different, cooler parents, to count their blessings and maybe thank them their lives for not being a part of Ted Bundy's family tree. I mean, after all, it could be much worse to endure in life, than not being allowed to stay up playing Fortnite like my nephews do, or like my nieces do, driving around in her best friend's Civic, taking selfies for her TikTok channel. Life could be so much worse. But seriously though, Studies do show that unresolved emotional trauma often triggers harmful coping mechanisms, which can lead to stuff like substance abuse or aggression. And we all know, especially when it comes to addiction, you know, this is gonna pave the way for criminal activity because people will do whatever they can to ignore their feelings, to push them way down, or do whatever they can to exert power over those around them so they can get what they want. So, okay, discussing this issue is great. I mean, we could talk about it all day long, and I'm gonna talk your ear off here for a while about it. But how can we, in the psychology community, help? Like, how can we even make a difference? Well, believe it or not, for starters, managing our own emotional reactions and triggers is key. It's important for us to take a minute and reflect on what our emotions are and what triggers our reactions, you know, if we fly off the handle and those kinds of things. And I don't know if anyone here has worked with trauma-affected individuals yet, whether it be children or adults. I have, very briefly, but you have to ask yourself, how do you manage your own reactions when you're working with people, even your own family? Like, how do you keep your stuff from, you know, interfering with their stuff? I mean, what's the best way that you can help and provide effective support for anyone, kids, adults, whatever? This is something that we call self-awareness and regular reflection. This is gonna allow us to acknowledge and understand our own emotional responses so that we can prevent our own emotional interference in therapeutic settings and even just, you know, sitting down and talking with your friends. You know, this is by reflecting on how we feel about different situations, this is gonna help us help others and keep our own thoughts and opinions out of it. It's not fair for us to put our own crap on everybody else and then try to help them too. It's not gonna work that way. And believe it or not, participating in our own therapy can actually be beneficial, especially if we can't figure out what's going on in our own, I call it brain house. If we can't figure out what's going on in our own brain house, we can't help anybody else. That's insane. But by getting our own help, we will also learn coping strategies to help other people. Not only is it gonna help us, our own emotional stability, but it's gonna enhance our resilience as professionals and ultimately make us better practitioners. Furthermore, continuing education and training, such as workshops, interventional training courses, and even conferences, can provide us with a forum for sharing experiences, learning new skills, and seeking advice. So, now, I ask, what are you good at, and what can you do better? Do you need additional training? Are there other resources that you need, or anything that you need that can help you personally and professionally? Because it's important, again, I'll say it 1,000 times, we can't help anybody else without helping ourselves. It might sound selfish to outsiders, but in reality, if we're gonna be effective at being professionals, we have to be able to get to the nitty-gritty of our own problems. And it's important to know we should always be making forward progress, because we're never gonna be absolutely perfect in psychology, regardless of what our role is. I mean, just professionals in general, we're not gonna be perfect. But by implementing strategies and seeking additional training and other resources, and even support, we can effectively manage our own stuff. But then we'll also be able to be comprehensive, ethical, and compassionate to support children who are experiencing any kind of trauma, and adults as well. So we know that the haunting experiences of criminals like Ted Bundy illuminate that there's many types of childhood trauma, and it can affect everything. Emotions, you know, your physical reactions, everything. There's even something that we call empirical evidence from a study that was published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence that specific effects of trauma, and we're gonna talk about it, it's important, sexual abuse, okay? Even specific, I mean, when you get down to it, the nitty-gritty of sexual abuse can affect everyone. And it doesn't have to happen just when you're a little kid or a teenager. It can happen as an adult. Unfortunately, it happens when you're elderly as well. But again, these types of trauma without intervention can have some extremely devastating effects. I think most of us are familiar with David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. He had severe sexual abuse at the hands of his adopted mother. This abuse left deep emotional scars on him, which, like Ted Bundy, influenced his path to create some really disgusting crimes when he got older. We do know that it was roughly in the, I want to say 1970s in New York, because Berkowitz he could not form intimate relationships no matter what. His mother destroyed that connection for him. So his way of coping was to target couples that were parked in cars, making out, what have you. It pissed him off. He wasn't comfortable with it, so he started shooting and killing all of these couples. Now, we're not saying it could be as simple as therapeutic intervention to prevent anything that Berkowitz did. And this is also not to say that these children who have experienced emotional or sexual trauma are gonna go out and, start killing people or what have you. However, building therapeutic relationships as our role in psychology, we need to involve their family members and caregivers in the healing process. And it's important that we advocate for policies aimed at preventing sexual abuse. These are integral parts of a psychologist's role in supporting what we know to be survivors. We know that since the 1970s, even since the early 2000s, the world of psychology has evolved. And now it's even divided up into different sects of even more specialized, detailed training. There's something that, I don't know if you're familiar with trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, but this type of therapy actually will help address the specific needs of children who've experienced sexual trauma. And it will even provide, there's evidence-based interventions. I actually have a handout if anyone wants one that has additional information on it, to give additional ideas and research on how to approach children who are dealing with specifically sexual trauma. So we know that childhood trauma, and I'm going to probably say it 10 times here, but it has many layers, and there's been research, clinical observations, and even experiences shared by survivors. But we also know the unfortunate legacies, if you want to call them that, left in the wake of famous criminals. But there's so many research studies out there. I could talk all day long about all of the research studies on this. But all of these various forms of childhood trauma, including the emotional and sexual abuse that we just talked about, but there's also something that kind of gets glazed over a little bit that I think is extraordinarily important. But it is traumatic injuries, like accidents or medical procedures that endured during childhood that can be devastating. Not only physically, but there's also the mental aftermath. Whether it's a traumatic brain injury or a fall, a severe burn from a household accident, it doesn't matter. Children who experience any kind of traumatic injury may struggle with not only physical disabilities, chronic pain, but emotional distress. This can disrupt their development and overall well-being if there's no intervention. Believe it or not, there is actually an example of a criminal that experienced physical trauma when he was a child. This guy's super gross. He's known as Richard Chase, the vampire of Sacramento, for what you can imagine. In 1977, Chase embarked on a killing spree in Sacramento, California, where he murdered 6 people in a series of brutal attacks. This earned him the title Vampire of Sacramento. Not only because of that, but he believed that consuming his victims' blood would prevent his heart from shrinking. We don't know why he had that thought, why he believed his heart was shrinking, but before all of this happened, Chase actually suffered a significant traumatic brain injury when he was 6 years old after he fell off of a swing. It's believed that that head injury he sustained actually disrupted his brain function, which contributed to disturbing behavior that he was already kind of exhibiting, showing signs of schizophrenia, and he was also there was some cruelty to animals and abusing his friends and things like that. And this head injury just exacerbated all of the stuff that he was already doing, unfortunately. There's a doctor, his name is Dr. Jonathan Pincus, he's a neurologist. And he talked specifically about Richard Chase. And he confirmed that how these types of injuries can actually lead to various cognitive and emotional impairments. This includes impulse control, emotional regulation, and even decision making. It affects these children's abilities to understand the difference between right and wrong, which is part of that impulse control and decision making. So again, while it is vital to acknowledge that not everyone who experiences childhood trauma is going to engage in criminal behavior, Richard Chase's case just underscores the complex dynamics at play when we're talking about traumatic injuries. So, as we contemplate how to better serve these children who are suffering from traumatic brain injuries, believe it or not, there are various approaches for us in the psychology community to use in order to help these children, just from a mental health perspective. We know that children who are dealing with traumatic injuries are already overwhelmed on the medical aspect of it, medications and surgeries and procedures and all those types of things, but we can also help with their mental capacity. There's something called the neurodevelopmental approach, a giant word that basically, it helps us understand their cognitive, emotional, behavioral functioning. There's a battery of tests that we can perform on these children to kind of see where they're at cognitively and understand how their behavior is. There are all kinds of training programs out there for us to utilize to help these children. Again, I have this information on this handout if anyone is interested in that. But researching that, if you are dealing with these children specifically, it's important to research anything that you can do to help these kids. Something else, interdisciplinary collaboration. Fancy words to say comprehensive care. Let's work with the child's entire medical care team. We need to work with their pediatricians, neurologists, occupational therapists, and speech language pathologists. Stay on board with everyone so we can help at every stop. Every time they need any kind of intervention with their mentality, we can help as much as we can. There are, I'm going to mention several training programs out there for any kind of interdisciplinary training. I mean, honestly, I know nothing about the medical field. Nothing. I'm not going to be a medical doctor. I don't have any interest in that. But there are training programs out there to help you kind of learn lingo and kind of, navigate your way through that so that you can work with their team and, know what you're talking about. And at least through this avenue, by helping and understanding every aspect of a care team, we're essentially learning those sides of the coin, which will help us as psychology professionals be 100% effective. So at this point, it's pretty clear that childhood trauma or early life adversity consists of numerous manifestations of trauma, including emotional, sexual, and medical abuse or trauma. And we're going to keep going because it doesn't stop here. Even begrudgingly, we're moving towards another prevalent issue of childhood trauma, the impact of substance abuse. So, unfortunately, we know the opioid epidemic is gigantic, and anyone that has, frequently entangled with childhood trauma, especially when, the parents are abusing drugs, it's kind of comorbid, right? So if they're abusing drugs, there's going to be violence right along with that. There is, and I'm going to mention several studies here because I think it's important to show this evidence. And the National Institute on Drug Abuse actually revealed that there is, it sounds obvious, but there's a parallel between multiple traumas and substance abuse disorders. Again, this seems like common sense information given the rampant rise in fentanyl and opiate abuse in this country, but it is detrimental to understand the snowball effect that this has. not just on the abusers, but everybody around them. And I think, most of us can probably relate in some way to knowing or have heard about someone dealing with addiction. Unfortunately, I have personally witnessed the unbelievably violent and disgusting acts drug users will put themselves into just to get their next fix, regardless if even their own children are involved. It's heartbreaking and angering all at the same time. And let me tell you what, if you think for 1 second that children won't remember what they're exposed to, even if they're young, you are wrong. We've all heard it. Kids are like sponges, and they will absolutely soak up every single sight and smell, sound around them, good and bad. I mean, my youngest nephew is 2, and all it takes is for him to hear a cuss word one time, and that's every other word out of his mouth. So you have to understand that when they're hearing it, seeing it, whatever, one day it's going to come back. The good, the bad, the evil, in some form or another, is coming back. Again, for the 100th time, there's another famous criminal that we're going to talk about who kind of went through the same thing. He illustrates the destructive power that addiction can have and the lengths that addicts will go to get their next fix. Doesn't matter what it is. They're going to steamroll everyone in their way. Richard the Iceman Kuklinski. He was actually an American contract killer who operated between the 1940s and 1980s. Hell of a time span. I think there's several movies about this guy. But throughout his entire life, he has struggled with addiction, drugs and alcohol. But he was also married at the time, and he had kids. Didn't care. He blamed his addiction on how violent he was and how he was able to kill all of these people like it was absolutely nothing. He for sure put his addictions and his really weird career over his entire family. Whatever he could do to get money to feed his drug and alcohol use. There was actually an HBO documentary where he has 2 daughters, and they talked about their father and the impact on his stuff, on their lives. And his one daughter said that their dad would disappear for weeks on end. They wouldn't hear anything from him, nothing. He wasn't sending them money, so their mom was struggling, working 2 and 3 jobs, trying to keep the roof over their head. And eventually they just stopped caring. They just, okay, yeah, it's gone, we don't care anymore. And then his other daughter actually told all of her friends at school and high school and college subsequently that her dad was dead. She just said it's just easier to tell people he's dead than to tell them who he really is. I mean, again, this is one of the more extreme examples of what can happen to children who are exposed to drug-related traumas. But we, as a part of the psychology community, play a crucial role in providing a safe space for these children. Not only where they can express their emotions, but help them understand the current experiences that they're in, and show them how they can develop helpful coping mechanisms, and let people know when they're not in a safe situation. And just like sexual abuse, children that are in these substance abuse trauma related situations, helping them also requires specialized training. I'm unfortunately very familiar with this organization. It's called the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. It's actually a government-run organization. And they have specific training on how to help children and adults dealing with substance abuse and trauma. This training, I think it costs around $400. It's a one-time thing. I encourage any of you that have any idea of working with children throughout your profession, I highly encourage you to take this training, because it's going to focus specifically on substance abuse and trauma. Not just working with children, but working with adults as well. And you're going to help adults that are also dealing with addictions. This is going to give you knowledge and skills to address the children that are specifically affected by drug abuse within their families. The skills that you're going to get from this, again, not only are going to help children, but are going to help adults. These tools are going to make you more comprehensive and more effective at helping care for children that are impacted by drug-related trauma. all you're going to do is promote healing and resilience to a vulnerable population. So I highly encourage you, if you have the time and the resources. I know a lot of universities are happy to provide grants for this type of training, so I definitely encourage you to do that. So we've already discussed some pretty messed up landscapes of childhood trauma, and we're not done. So there is something called biological repercussions of trauma. This is talking about kids that are in weird family situations that they may not know that they're in a bad situation, and even their parents or caregivers may not know that the kind of behaviors they're exhibiting over their children are inherently bad. But research shows now that it actually is considered different forms of childhood trauma. So, one more time, a notorious criminal, Jeffrey Dahmer. His upbringing was, to onlookers, weird and gross. Back when he was initially caught, everyone couldn't understand, what the hell is wrong with this guy? Like, why is he doing this stuff? We've seen in Netflix, the movies, documentaries, and all that, you know, but, I mean, inherently, like, his childhood wasn't really that bad. But yeah, no, it was. It was not okay. Jeffrey Dahmer's father was a chemist. Okay, that's cool. That's a respectable job, right? And we know that Jeffrey liked to, we'll say, experiment, and he kind of learned that from his father, except his experimenting was bizarre. But even after Jeffrey was caught, his father has said, I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. I was just trying to spend time with my son and teach him things that I knew. I mean, that's not totally bad. However, bringing home animal bones for Jeffrey to bleach and preserve is kind of weird. Maybe don't do that. I mean, most of us are going to say that that's probably an unusual father-son bonding type of experience. I mean, when my brothers were little, I have 4 brothers, when they were little, they would help my dad work on his car. I mean, that was, whatever, to each their own, I guess. But, you know, on the outside looking in, now knowing what we do know with all these interviews with Jeffrey and interviews with his father and such, his childhood was definitely unconventional. His father, one thing that was depicted in some of the movies was getting roadkill and dissecting it in their basement. No, we don't do that. However, but to Jeffrey and his father, that was father-son quality bonding. But now there's been some analysis that shows what we're calling this a radical parenting practice actually contributed to the even weirder stuff Jeffrey did when he was older. Jeffrey, part of this, because his father told him that this kind of stuff was normal, that it was okay to do this, kind of made Jeffrey detach himself. So when you think of, like, for example, a medical pathologist can perform an autopsy, and people ask, how can you do that? Like, doesn't that bother you? No, I just kind of check out mentally so that I can just do my job. And that's perfectly fine. But expecting an 8-year-old to do that, unfortunately, because he was so little and so impressionable, that's how he operated for the rest of his life. But then he moved on from squirrels to people. I mean, the stuff that he did with his dad, that was ground zero for the detachment that he had, the emotional detachment from the stuff that he was doing when he got older. I mean, we know how horrifically violent and depraved his crimes were. Luring young men into his apartment, drugging them, sexually assaulting them, murdering them, and then dismembering them. But he wasn't done there. Then he engaged in acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. Again, these crimes are evidence of the link between what we now know was childhood trauma that Dahmer was exposed to as a child and his later behavior. His distorted sense of connection definitely contributed to his propensity for violence. So, I mean, wow, what's the right approach here for a psychologist? You know, how can you help these children if the children and the parents aren't even aware of the danger that they're putting their kids in? yeah, most kids, when they're little, they're not really aware of when they're in the middle of a sketchy situation, but trauma can make it a little bit more complicated. So, I ask all of you, how can we as psychology professionals staunch this bleed and help these children heal? I mean, for starters, it's crucial that we adopt a trauma-informed approach where we can work on early identification and intervention, regardless of whether children are aware of their trauma. Me personally, I'm almost done with my master's degree, and before I started my program, I would have had no way of knowing, when children are dealing with these kinds of situations, especially when they think that they're just out there living their best lives. They've got the greatest home life ever. But when it comes to stuff like this, I mean, yeah, it was way back, 30 something years ago, but believe it or not, this crap is still going on. And it's important that we stay informed. Again, I'm a huge nerd and I love research. I thrive on it, but it's important to do the research. It helps if you're in school and they kind of force you to do it anyway. But understanding trauma-informed care, doing the research, will help you, will give you the skills to identify what these kids are going through, even if they don't even realize it. Because those kind of situations do need to be handled delicately, for sure. So, again, I've already reiterated this point several times. I'm going to do it one more time, maybe 10 more times. Childhood trauma, whether it's abuse, neglect, injuries, exposure to violence, continuously emerge as prominent indicators of adult criminal behavior. I mean, it's facts. I mean, I have my own opinions about it, but there are facts to show that as well. There was a study done actually just in 2023 where it showed that individuals who experienced trauma when they were children were actually 3 times more likely to engage in criminal behavior when they're adults. I'm not just talking about violent criminal behavior. Yeah, that's the majority of it, but I mean just criminal behavior in general. When I was growing up, my childhood wasn't great. We've all got a crappy childhood story. Every one of us do. Mine was not great. I'm right in the middle. I'm one of 7 kids, and I'm almost 40, and I'm still curious as to whether or not I'm adopted. My dad died when I was 6, and my half-brothers and half-sisters kind of went off and did their thing, but my mom just kind of sort of had this propensity to, not have great boyfriends. We'll leave it at that, but unfortunately my younger brothers and sisters dealt with some stuff. And I can tell you, unfortunately, they have all been in jail. Every one of them have been in jail. And for whatever reason, I was spared. I don't know why, but I have my own empirical evidence, my own personal evidence to show the trauma that they went through. I mean, again, it wasn't great, but I didn't endure physical trauma. I wasn't sexually abused. We struggled. My mom struggled hard to take care of all of us. It wasn't great. I didn't have, all the best things in the world. We had a roof over our head, and I was just fine. But unfortunately, I can't say the same thing for my brothers and my sisters. I'm just saying, they've all been in jail, and they've all been there for drug-related and violent crimes. And they endured physical abuse and sexual abuse. So that's pretty empirical. Yes. Okay. So, it's important to have strategies and methods for a psychological approach to trauma. But kind of the whole point of this is professional development. Kind of using that loosely though. But whether it's attending workshops, actively seeking mentorship, or devouring every book you can get your hands on. I'm a huge book nerd. I read all of the books. So if you are a book nerd, definitely read all of the books you can. it's important to arm ourselves with all the tools and resources out there to turn us into the best practitioners we can possibly be. And that includes admitting what we're good at and admitting kind of what we suck at, what we need to improve on. You know, admitting our shortcomings is probably, you know, I don't like to say that I don't like to be wrong. I don't like to say that I'm bad at stuff, even though there's lots of things I'm terrible at, but I will fart my way through it as much as I can to make it look like I can do it. But, you know, when it comes to being in psychology, to being a therapist, we still have to take stock of who we are and where we can improve. This is a goofy analogy, but you know, no one wants to be at the party who confesses that they suck at karaoke unless you're like me and you're drunk and you think that you are the best singer in the entire world. I cannot sing, but you know, when it comes to the realm of psychology, embracing our areas for improvement is essential. Not only, if you become a psychologist, you're required to do continuous education anyways, you kind of don't have a choice. But seek it out on your own too. I always encourage it. Again, I'm a nerd, I love to learn, so I'm always looking, I mean, I don't like to hemorrhage money on all this stuff, but I do like to learn. So if you have the opportunity to find things that can help you improve as a psychologist, certainly do it. By understanding, you know, what we're good at and where we need a little bit of fine tuning, we can be the best that we can be. God, that sounds so corny, but it's true. You know, whichever one of the military branches be all that you can be, it's goofy as hell, but I mean, you know, it's super important if you want to be effective. If you want to be good and make a difference and help not only you, but everyone else, do it. I mentioned this before, but collaboration is humongous. I've been looking forward to this conference since last year, you know, hobnobbing with everyone in the field, just getting to know one another and networking. Because you would be surprised, you know, at all the connections. You know, you may not be so good at helping children that are dealing with substance abuse trauma, but then you're like, oh, shit, I met Tara at the conference and she works on that specifically. Let me reach out to her and see if she can help. So it's really important to kind of get out of your comfort zone and talk to people and get to know one another and network. If this is your first conference, fantastic. It is mine as well. But go to more. Seek it out purposely. Work with your local community leaders, educators, to make sure that your strategies align and you can help each other. There's a couple of programs that, well, they're, I guess, countrywide, but in my state, we have something called, which is my favorite program, it's called the Handle with Care program. This connects law enforcement, schools, and mental health providers to help children that are exposed to trauma. For example, actually, we had to utilize this program, unfortunately, for my nephew. His father was extraordinarily abusive, and he actually reached out to a police officer that was his neighbor, and they were actually able to help him through this program. And so the whole point is if a child experiences a traumatic event, such as witnessing a domestic dispute, in his case, or even being involved in a car accident, the law enforcement officers will let the school know what's going on, and once the educators are aware of the situation, discreetly, they'll reach out to the child for, you know, extra support, you know, kind of low-key counseling, those kind of things, to make sure that the kids are safe and they're feeling understood and cared for. This proactive approach, I absolutely love it. I mean, it's not only addresses the immediate needs of the child, but, you know, it also promotes a culture of care and collaboration between psychology and the educational community. It's, you know, it's incumbent upon us to embark on this journey with unwavering determination. We have to work really hard to make sure that not only are we equipping ourselves, but also caregivers and educators with the tools to help. It doesn't matter, you know, at the end of the day, we just need to help each other. That's it. It would be nice, you know, if childhood trauma came with one of those, like, dumbass cigarette pack labeled warning, exposure to violence during childhood may lead to criminal behavior, but you know, that's never gonna happen. But until then, it's important for us to unite in our commitment to help these kids. However, it doesn't matter, however we can. Let's help each other, that's it. You know, Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we do better. So, let's figure it out. Let's work together, fill our brain houses with all the stuff we can to help ourselves and help these kids. I know I rambled a lot, but thank you everyone for coming here and listening to me. I appreciate it. If you'd like to get some more information, not only on the Handle with Care program, but there are specific programs like, believe it or not, Neighborhood Watch. It's not about catching your neighbors not picking up the dog poop. You can actually, you know, really make a difference. And then there's some other organizations as well as training resources for you and some free stuff. I mean, if you guys are college students, like when you're broke as hell, free is always great. So they're on this handout if you want some additional information, free stuff, you're welcome.